Have you ever wondered how non-heteronormative identities were perceived in pre-colonial South Asia? Well, it's a rich tapestry of cultural and religious beliefs that shape the perceptions of diverse gender and sexual expressions. In the pre-colonial era, many societies were relatively fluid when it came to gender and sexual identities. Some communities even held spaces for third genders, like the Hijra community, and recognized love that transcended the heteronormative binary. However, not all societies were as accepting. Many marginalized or stigmatized individuals who deviated from the traditional norms, but the concept of medicalizing or pathologizing these identities as psychiatric disorders was a foreign concept that was yet to be introduced. This era was characterized more by social and cultural perspectives rather than medical labels, with acceptance and discrimination varying greatly from one region to another, from one community to the next. Pre-colonial South Asia had varied perspectives on non-heteronormative identities, some accepting, others stigmatizing. The advent of colonial rule brought about a shift in perceptions. Under the yoke of colonialism, South Asia was introduced to Western psychiatry and psychology, which played a significant role in the medicalization and pathologization of non-heteronormative identities. The Western medical concepts of homosexuality and transgenderism, steeped in Victorian-era moral values, were imported into South Asia through colonial legal systems and medical institutions. This influence was profound. The Victorian era, known for its strict societal norms and moral values, viewed non-heteronormative identities as deviations from the norm, as aberrations that needed to be corrected. Shaped by these values, Western psychiatry and psychology pathologized these identities, categorizing them as mental illnesses. During British colonial rule, these ideas were imposed upon South Asian societies. Laws were enforced criminalizing same-sex relationships, which were viewed as immoral and deviant. These laws were not merely punitive measures, they were symbolic, representing a forceful imposition of Western views on sexuality and gender. Medical institutions, too, were complicit in this pathologization. They adopted and propagated these Western concepts, further entrenching the view of non-heteronormative identities as disorders. This shift in perception marked a departure from pre-colonial times, when such identities were often understood within the frameworks of cultural and religious beliefs, and were sometimes even acknowledged and accepted. The colonial rule, guided by Victorian-era moral values, pathologized non-heteronormative identities as mental illnesses, leaving a lasting impact on the perception and treatment of non-heteronormative identities in South Asian societies. The shadow of colonial rule persisted in the post-colonial period. The colonial legacy did not end with the departure of the British. It continued to shape the post-colonial societies of South Asia, particularly in the pathologization of non-heteronormative identities. The colonial-era medical institutions and legal systems, which had pathologized and criminalized non-heteronormative identities, were inherited by the newly independent nations. The Western psychiatric diagnoses, such as homosexuality and gender identity disorder, were adopted by post-colonial governments, embedding these pathologies in the fabric of South Asian societies. This not only perpetuated the stigmatization of LGBT individuals, but also reinforced social discrimination. The medicalization of non-heteronormative identities framed these identities as mental illnesses, further entrenching prejudices in the public consciousness. Yet this period was not merely a continuation of colonial-era pathologization. It also marked the beginning of a resistance against these medical frameworks. Advocates and activists began to challenge the medicalization of their identities, pushing for the depathologization of homosexuality and transgenderism in psychiatric manuals. Despite these efforts, the post-colonial period saw a continuation of the colonial legacy in the medicalization of non-heteronormative identities. The pathologization of these identities not only hindered acceptance and inclusion, but also reinforced the discriminatory laws and attitudes inherited from the colonial era. The post-colonial period saw a continuation of the colonial-era medicalization of non-heteronormative identities. The medicalization of non-heteronormative identities had far-reaching impacts. The perception of such identities as medical disorders in South Asia resulted in widespread stigma and discrimination. LGBT individuals were often seen as patients suffering from mental illnesses rather than recognized as valid expressions of human diversity. This pathologization fortified societal prejudices and erected barriers to challenging discriminatory laws and attitudes. However, let's not forget the tenacity of the human spirit. Despite this pathologization, resistance and advocacy movements have been kindled within South Asian societies. Brave LGBT activists and allies have tirelessly worked to deconstruct the medicalization of their identities. They've championed for the depathologization of homosexuality and transgenderism in psychiatric manuals and have promoted alternative, more inclusive understandings of gender and sexuality deeply rooted in their cultural and religious traditions. Understanding this complex history is key to promoting acceptance and equality for LGBT communities in South Asia today. Their struggle is a testament to resilience, a beacon of hope in the fight for acceptance.